Okay, my name's Mark Henderson. Pronouns are he, him. And this is my assistance dog, Harry, very much an assistance dog in training. I'm a barrister. I've been at Doughty Street since the 1990s. I specialise in media law and human rights related work. And since 2018, I've also been paraplegic following an accident in which I sustained a complete spinal cord injury and a head injury, which also left me with a severe hearing impairment. So I'm now, as well as an ambassador for Parapride, doing a lot of disability work in the bar, and I'm on the board of the Spinal Injuries Association.
How do your intersecting identities influence or impact your sense of belonging in the wider LGBTQ+ community?
So my disabilities themselves intersect with each other. One of the things that people perhaps don't think about as much when they think about the issues around using a wheelchair is the fact that you are a couple of feet lower down than other people in a standing position. And that can lead to non-disabled people sort of leaning down and appearing to talk in a fairly condescending way to someone in a wheelchair, sort of typical disablest stereotype. My hearing impairment also means that being 2 feet below other people standing, talking in a group is a major problem. I notice how much of a problem when I'm in functions and some people who are standing up say they need to crouch down to be able to hear me in a noisy function or event. So that too can lead to people having to lean down and shout at me. So these two disabilities intersect with each other to create a more challenging environment when I'm in events. And obviously, these are both very relevant in the LGBTQ scene, because if you want to be out and active, then you're generally going to be in places where most people are standing up. It's crowded, so people don't necessarily see a wheelchair user or realize that they need space to get past. And the conversation is going on at a different level from where you're at. And my hearing impairment is, I think, so long as I can get in the building, which of course, as we know, is far from a given, my hearing impairment is as much a barrier as being a full-time wheelchair user.
And you made a good point about the condescending looks. I also relate to that because, walking on prosthetic legs and my legs being visible, people just tend to stare below your body and, they don't see somehow that they are doing something that is rude. You can't be looking at someone for that long. And what I'll just quickly say this, but what I also got reminded about is how much, like with children, with younger, of course, they are seeing something that is new, that is different. So naturally, they are very curious. So they will point, they will ask their parents, why does that man, have a wheelchair? Why does that man have, like metallic legs? And a lot of the times, the parents, instead of saying something that is, they will get into, they will pull the child away, and then they will put, like they will shush them, like they will put their finger on their mouth, like don't ask, don't talk, don't say anything. What does that say to the child? is like, oh, this is definitely something that we are not allowed to talk about. This is something that is wrong, and I just, and it doesn't happen once, it happens many, many times. So that brought that in mind.
Yeah.
So yeah,
no, I get the same. Children saying things and their parents trying to hush them up and muttering sorry. And similarly, going down the street and at events, I mean, there are quite a lot of wheelchair users in the UK, but for the first 3 months after I was discharged from the spinal unit, I couldn't leave my house without a great deal of assistance. The pavements outside where I live have lots of broken curbs which could easily toss you out of a wheelchair. Using a manual wheelchair requires a lot of skill just to get to the shop, still less to get as far up the street as you get to Dalston to find out whether there's any accessible venues. And yeah, you get people looking, you're usually the only person in a wheelchair, so you're a very visible minority, but unlike a lot of other minorities in London, you're also very rare in that for so many of us it's not worth leaving the house. So you get people glancing quickly and then sort of looking away like, oh my God, we ought not to be looking at him.
In your experiences, what are the most significant challenges faced by disabled people within the LGBTQ plus community? You touched on a few, so this will be an opportunity to talk about maybe other things aside of accessibility, that continue preventing inclusion for disabled people.
Well, I think accessibility is linked to what I would identify as the other major problem, which is disableist attitudes or attitudinal barriers. Often access, particularly for wheelchair users, may not be straightforward to provide. For example, it may be possible to get into buildings using temporary ramps, but challenging for them to provide a disabled toilet. But where you see the attitudinal problems is in the difficulty that venues create in actually trying to work out what is and isn't accessible. A venue or an event should have accessibility information on the front page of its website. You should be able to contact someone. They should have thought through what they can and can't do, and be honest about that. And then disabled people can make up their own mind about whether to go. And the accessibility information should cover a range of disabilities, not just wheelchair access, for example. And I think that reflects the wider attitudinal problems on the LGBTQ scene, in that disabled people are just not thought about as a significant or important minority that should be forefront as one of the groups making up the LGBTQ community.
How can the wider LGBTQ plus community work better to dismantle discrimination towards minority groups, foster more inclusive environments, and promote empowerment for intersectional communities?
I think they need to work much more directly with disabled people and disabled people's organizations, including this one, to determine what works best for disabled people and what they can do to enable disabled people to play a full role in the community. I think one of my first Parapride events was going under the Parapride banner to London Pride, and I think 2019. And there we were there at the invitation of Stonewall, and we marched in between a trans bus and queer Muslim groups. And that was an example of Stonewall working really well to include a range of intersectional and marginalized groups in the forefront of the community. And we need more of that.
I'm so pleased that you mentioned about that experience, because that was, of course, that was one of our first pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
That was like a really big thing for us, marching at Pride in London. That was amazing. Can you share any experiences about empowerment linked to your intersectional identities that you want the wider LGBTQ plus community to be aware of?
Yes, I think that there is a particular problem perception relating to disabled people in the LGBTQ community and in wider society, in that we are, especially even as compared to some other minority groups, we are seen as especially voiceless as people who need to be thought about out of some moral or reputational duty, rather than as people who have civil rights as disabled people, a range of important rights under the Equality Act, and who are organizing in pursuit of disability justice. The times that I feel most empowered are often with other disabled people, either at parties or protests or both, where I see a range of people who would be seen by society as people who needed help, in fact, asserting and fighting for their civil rights as disabled people. And that's what I'd like the LGBTQ community to recognize more.